So I'm going to start us off in Russia, in Moscow to be precise, because we have got a massive rally underway that Putin is expected to speak at later today. We don't know if it's specifically to mark the 1 year anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine, but the timing is obviously fairly suspicious. The actual anniversary is on Friday. Putin isn't there yet. A massive nationalist rally of the kind that we saw last year with lots of performers in various traditional dress from across Russia, a band of accordion players with Z caps, incredibly colourful, lots of fireworks, thousands of people waving Russian flags. So a real sort of moment of nationalist fervour in Russia. We're waiting to see what Putin is going to say, but he'll be probably pressing the same lines around no regret of the Ukraine invasion, Russia will win, etc., etc. Where Putin is at the moment is he's been meeting with China's top diplomat, Wang Yi. Wang Yi was in Russia yesterday. He met with Sergei Lavrov. He's been doing the rounds, consolidating the Russian-Chinese relationship. We've had lots of comments from both sides saying that the relationship is reaching new heights, that cooperation is better than ever, that trade will increase this year, and that the relationship is one that can stabilise the world. That's what Putin said today. Quite a lot of bluster, but obviously this is a key geopolitical relationship to keep an eye on, one that we've seen certainly growing closer over the past year. Despite the complexities of China, for China about the Ukraine war and the sort of difficult position that it potentially put it in, China has not ever come out and explicitly condemned Russia. It's almost certainly working with it on providing arms and other sort of technical support. And that personal relationship, as we can see, is continuing to grow closer. We are expecting Xi Jinping to visit Russia at some point this year. Vladimir Putin alluded to that when he said he's looking forward to meeting Xi. Some other bits to flag, a bit more Ukraine-based. We heard a report today that Russia tried and failed to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile on Monday while Biden was in Ukraine. And this is its Satan II missile. That's the nickname that the West give to the Samizdat missile system. It did successfully test launch it last year. It's a nuclear-capable missile, but it apparently failed on Monday, which is quite amusing. And one other story to quickly flag is that the Wagner Group's chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, has been at it again, talking about the lack of ammo that his group are facing. Wagner, you'll remember, are fighting on the front line in Bakhmut and other areas of eastern Ukraine. They're pretty much Russia's best hope for frontline gains at the moment. They seem to be, leading the charge the most anyway. We did see a post last week. This might feel like a familiar story to some listeners. We saw a post last week from the Wagner Group in general. They posted a quite gruesome picture of a room filled with dead bodies, and Prigozhin later spoke about the lack of ammo. But he's posted another picture and specifically commented on it, saying all these people died from ammunition hunger, he called it. Ammo shortages have been a problem for both the Ukrainians and the Russians. Obviously, the Ukrainians are relying on the West to bolster their supplies of both bullets, shells, all kinds of ammo. But Russia doesn't have that many other partners to rely on and is having to sort of amp up its own industrial capabilities. And the Wagner Group has been very, very vocal. Prigozhin's been incredibly vocal about the lack of ammo that his group are facing and how it's causing lots of high casualty rate in Russia.
Well, thank you very much, Venetia. You've touched on a lot of things there. Could we just ask you to go into a little more detail about Biden's speech, President Joe Biden's speech in Poland yesterday? This actually happened after the podcast we recorded, so we didn't get a chance to speak about it, but it was huge news yesterday afternoon and evening. Can you talk us through what he said and what that might mean for the war?
Yeah, so Biden obviously was in Ukraine on Monday and then went to Warsaw, which was a more scheduled stop that we did know about after a surprise visit to Kyiv. It was a really massive speech, and he was sort of continuing the rock star theme that we saw on Monday, very confident, very assertive. At the best line from the speech, which is what we ended up doing a massive story on, was Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, never. But lots of good quotes from his speech talking about there should be no doubt our support for Ukraine will never waver, NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire. Kyiv stands strong, Kyiv stands proud. There is no sweeter word than freedom. This was really Biden in full force, showing Putin that the West is united on this war and it's not going to tire of it anytime soon, and that we will continue to support Kyiv in its battle to not be overtaken by Russia. And it's significant. This is obviously a week where we're seeing world leaders really come out and make their positions known on this sort of key week of the anniversary. Putin with his massive rally, Biden with a surprise visit to Ukraine, and they're setting out their stalls. They're saying no regrets, and we're going to keep going harder and stronger. And I think that tells you a lot about the direction that this war is going to go, and that it's not going away anytime soon.
Well, thank you very much, Venetia, for that. Welcome, Colin. We can see you're on as a speaker. Just before bringing in Colin, who I believe is in Kyiv at the moment, Dom Nichols, I know you have a few updates for us. Can you talk us through them?
Yeah, hi David, hi everybody, hi Colin. So the update from the ground in Ukraine, the only one to really focus on today is that something big went bang last night in Mariupol, or the early hours of this morning in Mariupol, been held by Russia for months now, the scene of the Azovstal steel plant, that stout defence there. But something hit an ammo dump last night, and it's made a very big bang on social media. Now, it's a long way away from any lines where Ukraine would be able to position something, and we're wondering, there's speculation whether or not this is the first evidence of the ground-launched small diameter bombs, a very long-range and very accurate weapon that we know has been sent to Ukraine. It's GPS guided, about 80 kilometers range, so it could hit Mariupol if it was right on the edge of the where the fighting is at the moment, which would be a risk for Ukraine to put a highly prized asset like that so close to the front line. But if they are willing to do it, and we've seen them take great risk before, then, and of course if this is what we think it might be, then it shows that actually they've got great reach here, and so it's one to watch. There maybe will be more of that, but I thought that was very interesting. I also just want to bring up to speed with a couple of things. I was in a brief yesterday with a Western official, as we said before, senior person or persons in the defence and security establishment, but I won't divulge who, where, or well, I told you the when. It was yesterday. But just a few bits and pieces from that I think we're particularly interested. Casualties we've spoken about as we can, when we can. It's very unclear about numbers on either side. And it is important. It's not just sort of ghoulish speculation. Of course, it is important to understand what the reality is on the ground. So what we think, this came from a Western official, and they've suggested that Russia is suffering about 1,000 casualties a day. Now, the recent figures, we were surprised a couple of weeks ago when the figures of sort of 800 a day were being produced. So that is just incredible, and had to sort of check it. And yes, that was the number being put out by Ukraine and then elsewhere. So Western official yesterday told me about 1,000 casualties a day. That's killed, wounded, missing, and taken prisoner. But 1,000 people off the battlefield. That is an enormous number of people. Now, on the Ukrainian side, the official said Ukrainian casualties were, quote, on a level that would be unsustainable for many countries, unquote, and a figure of at least 100,000. Again, dead, wounded, missing, captured. A huge number, but the about half what we think Russia has suffered. But more importantly than that, I think the dead to wounded ratio is significantly lower for Ukraine than Russia. Now, if you're defending, you generally take fewer casualties, and if you're attacking is a very risky business, and defensive positions can be extremely hard to crack. So the defender generally has fewer casualties. But even so, the Russian casualties are thought to be 10 or 20 to 1, as in 10 or 20 wounded for one dead, as opposed to Ukraine sorry, I've got this completely around the wrong way. Ukraine is thought to be 3 to 1. I've got my numbers all completely mixed up here.
Shall we, Dom, while you read these numbers again, should we go to Colin? Because I know he's in Ukraine and might not be able to stay for very long.
Yeah, I'll take my socks off.
All right, thanks, Dom. Colin, I don't know if you can hear us. If you can, would you like to tell us where you are roughly and what stories you've been looking at?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just in transit at the moment in a minibus. Yes, maybe I can just add in on what Don was talking about there. My understanding is that the Ukrainian figures are around 100,000 casualties, but with a kind of mortality ratio of between 1 in 10 and 1 in 20, which means that only between 1 in only between 1 in 20 and 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 of those people are actually dying. So I think if you extrapolate that out over 100,000, that would mean a total death rate of possibly about between 5 and 10,000, which is a lot less than the Russian ratio, which is closer to 3 to 1, and also a lot less than some of the figures we've otherwise seen bandied around for Ukrainian total deaths, which in some cases people have been speculating that it may be roughly comparable to what the levels that the Russians have suffered, which, according to some estimates, are anything up to about 60,000 or so. I hope that perhaps sort of sheds a bit of light on it. That's certainly my tuppence worth on it.
So, Colin, where have you been and who have you been talking to?
Well, I'm in Kiev at the moment. We've been here for about 5 or 6 days, just doing a bit of general reporting. One of the stories we've been looking at, which we will be filing in the next couple of days, is a sort of year-on look at recruitment and asking the question, really, does Ukraine have enough soldiers or manpower or people power, given this is a unisex army? Does it have enough people power for the job? Obviously, we saw at the beginning of this time last year lots of Ukrainians volunteering for the fight, people who had, in many cases, never picked up a gun before, and that effectively sort of doubled their fighting force from sort of, something like 200,000 people to around 400,000 people. So what we're really trying to do is just get a sense of whether they need more volunteers for the fight, given the fairly high levels of attrition that we've just been talking about. And we've been looking at recruitment campaigns and so on and so forth. And so just trying to get a fix on how things are going in that sense.
And did you reach any conclusions there, or are you still looking into it?
Well, one of the things that they certainly are looking for new volunteers. One of the main units here, the National Guard, which has about 100,000 soldiers in it. They normally do sort of like a gendarmerie arrangement. That's what they're kind of comparable to during peacetime, but during wartime they actually get involved as regular soldiers. They have just launched a new recruitment campaign this month, for which they've had about, I think, between 20 and 40,000 people applying. So that does suggest that there are quite a lot of people who are still willing to fight. In many cases, those are people who, for personal circumstances, haven't got round to fighting yet, rather than people who've suddenly gone through some massive change of heart. But it does suggest that there is still some gas left in the tank here in that sense.
That's fascinating. Earlier, Venetia Rainey talked to us about President Biden's speech in Warsaw, but you've been writing about his trip to Kyiv and how he came in on the train and all of that. What did you make of it? What did you discover?
Well, yes, I was actually in the main Kiev government press center at the time of Mr. Biden's arrival. It gives you a sense of the levels of secrecy that were surrounded the visit, in that nobody in the press center had the slightest clue what was going on, nor indeed did we. We suddenly noticed that there was a lot of traffic jams in the downtown area, which are not common at the moment because there's not that many people living in the city at present. And at first we thought it was a visiting delegation of Israeli politicians who do tend to travel around with quite high security whenever they go abroad. We thought that it was them who had brought the city to a halt. It then became clear that this was no mere foreign delegation, and no run-of-the-mill foreign delegation. This was something rather more important. And I think we found out it was President Biden within about half an hour of the traffic coming to a standstill. And then by that time, though, he had already gone. What he did was he turned up at St. Michael's Cathedral, which is one of the main churches in the city centre, and laid some flowers at War Memorial along with President Zelensky. I think by the time myself and most other people in Kiev learned about it, though, he'd already disappeared off the streets again. It was a very, very brief walkabout, and gave a kind of brief press conference to a few travelling White House press reporters who were with him. Again, all kind of behind closed doors. And then he was off again. I think the trip was 3 hours in total. Interestingly, it was he did not come in on Air Force One, which is his normal mode of transport, nor did he use the Beast, which is his big armoured limousine, which he often travels around in as well. Instead, he came in, like many other world leaders have done, on the train, which is currently considered to be really the only safe way for foreign dignitaries to visit Ukraine. This being because the airspace above Ukraine is not fully controlled by the Ukrainian military. It's contested airspace, you could describe it as. And for a US president, that's relatively unusual to be traveling anywhere where the airspace is not controlled by the US or one of its allies, or where the president is not arriving with the express permission, with the tacit consent of whoever's controlling that airspace. So that was the essence of the trip. It was all conducted under complete secrecy, though. And apparently was several weeks in the planning, even senior White House staff not being aware of it. Although for the average Kiev resident, I think the only thing they saw was a few large traffic jams downtown, and then a few quick images on their TVs.
Thanks, Colin. And can I ask, before we go back to Dom Nichols, you've been in Kyiv now for, I think it's about coming up to a week. You're back there. What's your sense of the mood, the atmosphere ahead of this Friday?
So I've been here a few times in the last year since the war started. Certainly things are obviously a lot more relaxed than they were this time last year, when it really did feel like World War III was breaking out. There was a sense of fear on the streets, etc., etc. I would say now, certainly people do remain convinced that the war is going their way, but there's definitely a sense of fatigue coming in. It doesn't mean to say that morale is dropping, but I don't think the anniversary is going to be a time for a great deal of celebration per se. I always temper these sorts of comments by saying, people present a certain face to the Western media, I suspect, and they don't want to give the impression that everybody's completely fed up and can't bear to face another year of war. But I think definitely this is a point where, just sort of the boost that everybody got at the beginning, when it turned out that they could fight the Russians and keep them at bay, and that this was not the invincible army that everybody said it was. I think that euphoria is clearly probably running a bit low now, and it's just become a new normal, which a lot of people are kind of finding quite hard to cope with. But that doesn't mean to say they won't cope.
Well, thank you very much, Colin. It's really good to hear from you, and do stay safe while you're out there. Tom, can I come back to you? You've got a few more important updates for us to digest.
Yeah, sure. I've taken a deep breath. I'm ready to go back into battle with the numbers. But essentially what we were talking about there with the casualties is that Russia are having a far higher casualty rate in terms of people killed. And they're putting that down. Western officials are putting that down. Oh, Colin, I think you're still on. You need to mute yourself, mate, as you're clambering out of the van. Western officials saying that the Russian medical chain is just woefully inadequate. So if you are injured in the Russian army at the moment in Ukraine, you are far more likely to die than if you were injured in the Ukrainian army. So much higher casualty rate with the Russians, down to a poor medical chain. Now, it's thought to be, it's woolly, of course, but Western officials thinking there could be up to 300,000 Russian troops in Ukraine. And they're saying that at least half the mobilised force, which they think was in the hundreds of thousands, at least 200,000, at least half that mobilised force was immediately sent to Ukraine. And we think that may well account for the huge casualties we've seen in the last few weeks, because they are untrained. poorly equipped, poorly led, and they are just. We've heard the expression "human wave" around Bakhmut in that area. They are not being employed correctly, and they are paying a horrific price for it. Now, the rest of the mobilised force, which could be about 100, 150,000 people, that is said to be either in Russia or in Belarus training, but is being held as an operational reserve. Now, they've either had no training or absolutely minimal training. And that means, effectively, there is no reserve. Now, you've got to have, if you are an attacking force or a defending force, you've got to have a reserve. You need a reserve to exploit success or to plug a sudden hole that appears when the enemy breaks through. Or, we all need a little fudge factor. We all need something in our back pocket to chuck at a problem or an opportunity as they appear. That's your operational reserve at every level. So, a company of 100 fighters should have a small reserve of maybe, a section of eight people or something like that. A battalion of 500 should have a reserve of a platoon of 30, a brigade, a division. They should always be, the commander at any level should always be able to reach out and grab a reserve to, as I say, chuck at a problem or an opportunity. So if Russia does not have an operational reserve, or it consists of extremely poorly trained, newly mobilized soldiers, they are not going anywhere fast, and they could very easily go backwards if they are hit with a credible punch from Ukraine. So I thought that was quite interesting, and that may also that may account for why we're seeing so little happening in the Donbass. The lines aren't moving much. There's not a huge amount of success there for them to reinforce, but equally they just haven't got the forces to do it. So moving on. This figure, Ben Wallace used the figure of 97% of the Russian army was deployed in Ukraine. He said that a couple of weeks ago, and it caused all sorts of confusion because, that's a hell of a big number, 97%. So that was asked of Western official, and the answer came back that the 97% deployed meant that 97% of units in the Russian army have supplied something for the war. So either personnel, equipment, or they've provided training. So it's not 97% of the entire army in Ukraine, but it's a whole, almost a whole of force effort in some capacity. And then just finally, there are, as of yesterday, no signs that China is preparing to supply lethal aid. This was a comment that came out of Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the Munich Security Conference at the weekend, said that would be extremely serious if China sort of crossed that Rubicon. But no suggestion China is preparing to supply lethal aid or has shown any interest in sustaining the war. So China at the moment is giving diplomatic cover, if you like, that we don't know of any material or humanitarian support for Russia. But at the moment, no suggestion they're doing anything more than that. The last point I want to make, and it came from the Munich Security Conference last weekend, there are discussions ongoing about a tank coalition to support Ukraine. This is sort of Leopard tanks. The Americans said they'll send Abrams. Britain said we'll send Challenger 2, but Leopard is the name of the game. German produced Leopard in widespread service around Europe and the world. So there are many more Leopard variants out there. So Finland's Defence Minister Mikko Savola, he said that this idea of a tank coalition had moved on, said there'd been intense talks between Germany and Poland, and that Finland's participation in this Leopard initiative will be finalised in the next few days, i.e., these are the next few days, so hopefully we'll hear something soon. So what's happening here? So Germany and Poland are leading this emerging idea of a Leopard coalition. They've expressed an aim to quickly establish 2 Ukrainian tank battalions with 31 Leopard 2 tanks each. Now, Germany and Poland have promised 14 tanks. Canada has promised 4, Poland 3, and Spain today has. I'm looking at breaking news here. Spain has said they are going to supply 6 Leopard 2A4s. There. Margarita Robles, the Defence Minister of Spain, said, "We are repairing right now 6 Leopard 2A4 vehicles with the possibility, if needed and if our allies request it, of increasing that number." And she said the tanks would be ready by late March, early April. So this is, it's moving in the right direction. And Finland's Defence Minister, Mikko Savola, said that Finland would be able to supply both battalions. The idea is that one battalion would be the older 2A4 version. That's the most widespread version around the world. 1990s vintage first came in. And the other battalion would be the 2A6, so a more modern version, built in the last 20 odd years. It's got a slightly different gun, different turret armour. They're both 120mm smoothbore main armament, but there are a few bits and pieces. And the 2A6 is just a newer variant. Now, the European Council on Foreign Relations, a think tank, said that there is, they put out an article recently saying there's a reason to suspect that some earlier proclamations of willingness about tanks were made only to pile pressure on the Germans, unquote. And that's an interesting point, because a lot of people made good noises about supplying tanks, and now when it comes to actually putting numbers on that, we're still waiting for numbers. As I said, Canada, Portugal, Germany, Poland, Spain have actually put numbers on their pledges, and we're waiting for and hoping for others. But this is a long game, right? Tank production is a long game. The Leopard production line at the moment is basically being kept alive by an order from Hungary for 44 tanks, and it's highly likely that Norway is going to put a bid for at least 50 of the new 2A7 version, the most modern version. Czech Republic is also thinking that is looking likely to buy the 2A7. Germany are trying to upgrade their fleet to 2A7. They've already got 2A7 in service, and they had earmarked 68 of the older 2A4s and 16 2A6s to be modernised for 2A7. But it now looks like that's going to be too costly, so there may be those tanks might be up for grabs. But the point is that this is a big undertaking. The maintenance of these things. Where are you going to do all that? Is it going to be in Ukraine? I mean, there will be certain elements of that, but also it needs to be outside Ukraine as well, but possibly outside with a view to moving inside the country after the war as part of a long-term security guarantee. But Germany needs long promises. If you buy a tank, you're talking 20 years minimum to have it in service. So these are big political decisions, and we're not everyone. When do you press print? We're not quite at hover tanks yet, but people are saying, tanks are going to be obsolete in 5 years' time, or you've got to do this, got to do that. So it's a big political call to say, right, we are going to invest in these things, and we're going to have them in for 20 odd years. We'll upgrade the armour, we'll upgrade the sights and the weapons maybe, but essentially the tank hull is going to be the same. That's the argument with Britain's Challenger 2 programme being upgraded to Challenger 3. Might be a new turret, but the hull, when they go out of service, the hull will be about 60 years old. So, this is a big a long-term commitment. And where's that money going to come from? You can't expect Germany to handle all that. Do you then look to the EU to produce these factories all across Europe, sort of generating Leopard 2 production lines so that Ukraine has a long-term security guarantee? Does it come from the jointly chaired UK-Dutch International Fund for Ukraine that we've mentioned a number of times, some of the meetings I've been to? So there are big decisions to be taken here.